My name's Mick Napier, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. This is one of our irregular but very frequent Sunday afternoon broadcasts where we speak to somebody we think, or speak to people we think have something significant to offer to the discussion of how to deliver effective solidarity to the beleaguered and violated people of Palestine. Today, I'm delighted to have two guests, Annie O'Gara from Sheffield PSC, whom some of you may know from other campaigns, and Guy Shennan from, Guy, what's the group? It's not SWAN, it's the Palestine Mental Health Network, is that right?
Yep, very close. The UK Palestine Mental Health Network. Forgive
me, that's not the last mistake I'll make today. But we're going to talk about something very, very important. And when I heard about it, I confess I was too busy to give it any attention. But really, I was so disgusted to hear the background to this discussion today. I'm very, very glad indeed that we've made amends for being a bit slow off the starting block. Annie O'Gara from Sheffield, Guy Shennan, campaigning on issues related to Palestine. Who started this and why?
If I can answer that, Mick, it started at a Boycott Israel Network conference when Tom Anderson and Elisa Eggert of the Shoal Collective made a presentation about house demolitions in Palestine. And they collect data and with their particular emphasis, which is corporate complicity. And they work with ICAD UK on the stats, etc. But the two groups have great synergy because they come at the same political territory with a different emphasis. So Tom and Elisa highlighted what JCB, this family-owned British company, were doing in terms of house demolitions, and also the way that the family has got honours for its work. So Carol Bamford, for example, has had a home named after her by the NSPCC, and her husband, Anthony Bamford, he's either a Lord or a Sir, I can't quite remember which, and it was Tom.
You're saying JCB is mainly a British company, it's not Japanese or Korean or international, it's substantially British.
It's British, it's family owned as well by the Bamford family, who are extraordinarily rich and who've been elevated within the British honours system. And Carol Bamford has been distinguished by the NSPCC for the vast donations, over £5 million, that they've given to the NSPCC.
NSPCC, National Society for the Protection of Prevention of Cruelty to Children.
That's right, yeah.
What's JCB doing with them?
Well, what they're doing is what a lot of big businesses do. Just like Israel, big businesses want to be respectable, get legitimacy, etc. And what better way to get legitimacy than to make massive donation to a charity like the NSPCC, which is a household name for virtue, and to sanitize and launder your reputation by so doing. So three of us, Shireen Green, Avril Parkinson, and I picked it up thinking that, as you would, NSPCC, a good charity, children to the forefront, great values if you look on their website. We thought it's a low-hanging fruit. Because if you look at the website, what hits you straight away are sentences like, every child matters, every child is worth fighting for. And as you know, and Guy knows, that's a direct echo of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, a universally respected
why shouldn't they take money? Annie, why shouldn't money from JCB? What's JCB up to?
JCB sells to Israel via its business partner, Camasco. JCB knows very well that Camasco then distributes its bulldozers, etc., into Israel. JCB knows that the United Nations have put JCB on a list of companies complicit with Israel in settlement building and in the apartheid wall. It's one of only 3 British companies on the list that the UN have picked out. And that's before you even look at what JCB does in the West Bank and JCB's equipment does in the West Bank and East Jerusalem in home demolitions. So JCB equipment is sold into Israel via JCB's partner, with the family knowing full well, seeing all the evidence from Amnesty, from the UN, from B'Tselem, of how that equipment is being used, and yet it continues to do this. And I'll just mention one other thing that JCB know about, and that's that a very distinguished group of lawyers for Palestinian human rights, have taken JCB up on this, reporting them to an organisation called the National Contact Point. And the National Contact Point is the British place where companies can be reported if they violate OECD guidelines. The OECD, the Office for Economic Cooperation and Development, sets principles, sets guidelines that businesses are supposed to stand by with regard to their human rights due diligence. And it includes looking at their supply chain, looking at business relationships, and scrutinising any harm that they might be inadvertently, or in JCB's case, advertently, knowingly doing through their supply chain and through their business connections. So JCB knows full well what the score is, and it's named and shamed by various big organisations, and yet JCB continues to sell via Camasco into Israel. And the NSPCC, sadly, knows all this as well and continues to take money from JCB,
So,
£5 million so far.
is this a good time to show the little three minute film? The frame of the conversation, your contributions. Who's going to show this film, Annie? Is it you or Jimmy?
I'm going to try.
Bear with us, folks. We hope the technology will work for us. It's only a 3-minute film and well worth your viewing.
On Monday, heavily armed Israeli soldiers arrived in the Palestinian Bedouin village of Hamza. They used a bulldozer manufactured by British company JCB to flatten people's tents and possessions while the villagers looked on. This was the 3rd time in just 1 week that soldiers had come to demolish homes in Hamza. The demolitions are part of a colonial policy aimed at stealing Palestinian land. Aisha, one of the residents of Hamza, told journalists from Middle East Eye, "The community has become rubble. The Israeli army came and destroyed all of our homes and tents. We are now in the open between the ground and the sky. We have no alternative but to remain here on our land. They will continue to demolish and we will continue to build and remain steadfast here." The Canary also spoke to Palestinian activist Jamal Juma. He told us,
"The destruction of Hamza community north of the Jordan Valley by the Israeli occupation forces is part of an ethnic cleansing plan targeted Palestinian communities. This is a crime against poor people who's living in their land hundreds of years, destroying their future, terrifying them. And for those companies that their bulldozers are used for the destruction of these communities, I'm telling them, shame on you."
JCB is owned by the Bamfords, one of the wealthiest families in the UK. The company is currently facing an investigation over the use of JCB machines in home demolitions. We asked Jamal how we should respond to these demolitions and what action ordinary people could take against companies like JCB. Here's what he said.
"We should gather our efforts to boycott them, to isolate them, and to tell them what you are doing is violating the international law. What you are doing is horrible, is crimes against humanity used by this criminal state."
JCB has been told time and time again that their equipment is being used in Israel's home demolitions. It's time for JCB's directors to distance themselves from state-sanctioned racism and to prevent JCB equipment being used by the Israeli army.
So, Annie, JCB helps to make Palestinian children homeless, makes them live among the rubble of their homes, and then donates to the NSPCC. Develop the argument. It's really obvious, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, for over a year and a half, we've been conversing with the NSPCC, giving them all of this facts, giving them all of this evidence. And by the NSPCC, let me just make it plain, I mean the very well-paid executive board that sit at the top of the charity and the board of trustees who make the decisions. I don't mean the grassroots workers, the volunteers, the fundraisers who do phenomenal work for children who really need help and support. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. So when I say the NSPCC, I'm talking about the well-paid decision makers at the top. So we've been giving them all of this information. Plus there's been a very big campaign going on. Loads of people have joined it, letter writing. We had a postcard campaign as well. 3,000 postcards were printed with an image on the front of the postcard. If I can. So we had 3,000 of these printed, and Shireen did a tremendous job distributing these across the UK in small batches so that people could give them to friends, family, colleagues, comrades, and post them in to the trustees. There's been a petition, 2,000 signatures on it. There have been banner drops and demonstrations outside some of the dealerships, for instance, here in Sheffield and down in the south of England. ICAD has done 2 webinars on it. So there's been lots of pressure put on JCB, on the NSPCC. JCB don't answer anything that they send to them. And sadly, what the people at the top of the charity have said is that they've got their standards, they're doing their due diligence, and I'll just tell you what their due diligence involves. They've said they won't have any relationship with, quote, any organisation connected with slavery, human trafficking and child labour, or where a director or officer has been convicted of a serious criminal offence, they don't look at the export record of their big donors unless the British government has put formal restrictions on the country to which they're exporting. Well, these are incredibly low moral benchmarks, and nobody, I think, on this call would set their moral compass to any government's moral compass. And it's a great disappointment that that's what the NSPCC is doing. And I'd like to make it plain that doesn't have to be the case. The Charity Commission and the Institute of Fundraising have both produced guidelines about donors to charities. And they both say that charities can and should scrutinise their donors to see if there's been any major public concern raised against them, or if linking with them would cause reputational damage to the charity. Well, I mean, what bigger organisation is there than the United Nations, or Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights, or Amnesty? So the NSPCC is people at the top are not using the powers they've got to prune, to select, to get rid of donors that really are compromising, in my view, the reputational integrity of the charity. And I'll just give you their defence, if I may. We sent a formal letter of concern into them, which they did answer in some detail. But when they answered it, it was plain that what they'd done is gone to JCB, and JCB had fed them some stories. And JCB had said in their defence that they had asked the United Nations to take them off the list. Well, they've clearly failed, because they're still on the list. And, you know, everybody knows that the United Nations doesn't just pluck a name out of a hat and bang it on a list. They've gone through a rigorous procedure before they put people on such a high-profile list of complicity with Israel in criminal activities. And the other defence that they came up with was equally wrong. They said that the National Contact Point had dismissed Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights complaint. Well, we asked Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights, and it's just not true. They've dismissed one strand of it, but two very significant strands are still going forward. And sadly, JCB fed this to the people at the top in the NSPCC, and they've swallowed it. So we contradicted that in another final letter, and they've acknowledged the letter, but they've refused to answer it. And that's why I really welcome the initiative that Guy and his comrades and colleagues in the social work networks have initiated.
Thank you, Annie. You, Guy Shennan. Can I share an image, Guy, first of all? I just need to know how to do it. Here we go. It's from what I think is the best film ever made about Palestine, Arna's Children. This is Allah in the rubble of his home after it has been demolished by Israel in Jenin refugee camp. The film really touched me in a way that it's difficult to express. But this is the child in the rubble of his home, destroyed by Israel as a collective. Guy, why did you get involved in this fantastic initiative?
Just to say first, Mick, well, thanks very much for inviting us on today to talk about this issue. And I first saw that film in a cinema in Ramallah during my first visit to Palestine in 2004. Yeah. That was an international student work camp at Birdslake University, and very, very powerful film. Secondly, huge credit to Annie and her colleagues in this campaign. She mentioned Shireen and Avril and there's others too. And they've done a fantastic job. I'd heard of JCB's involvement and their equipment being used to demolish Palestinian homes. I don't think I'd been aware, to be honest, about the NSPCC's connection and them taking money off JCB until late last summer. And you did mention at the start, Mick, you were asking which network I'm part of, and you mentioned SWAN. Just to say, I am a member of the Social Work Action Network, group of campaigning social workers, and I'll come back to SWAN in a moment, because they've been, as ever, really, at the centre of making this into a, bringing this to the attention of social workers. It first came to my attention as part of the steering group of the UK Palestine Mental Health Network. And we were contacted, one of our number was contacted by a colleague of Annie's, I think it was Monica originally, to inform us of the campaign and the NSPCC involvement, and would we want to get involved. And so, I mean, I've got quite a lot of connections with the NSPCC, and I think everyone knows the NSPCC. As Annie said, it's a household name. They're right at the centre of the UK social work establishment. Their origins go right back to the origins of modern social work in the late 19th century. So they're a really important part of the social work establishment, the social work profession, a human rights profession. Social workers, I was going to say pride themselves, that sounds a bit pejorative, but social workers are human rights-based workers. They should be human rights-based workers, and social work organisations should be human rights-based organisations. So that's the first thing to say, really. And in terms of some of my personal connection, I think the first ever social worker that I came across was when I was at sixth form, and somebody from the local NSPCC team came to talk to us about the work that they did in protecting children. This is in the late 1970s. 10 years later, I was qualified as a social worker. So that started my journey to become a social worker, having an employee, a worker from the NSPCC, a social worker, come and talk to a group of sixth formers. And just to echo what Annie said, of course, this isn't about individual employees of the NSPCC. They do great work, and my next contact with the NSPCC that I recall was before I qualified as a social worker. There was a well-known team in Rochdale who wrote a book called Dangerous Families. Very important work at the heart of responding to child abuse in the UK. And when I did my qualifying course in Sheffield, there's a slight connection there with Annie, in the late 1980s, 87 to 89, my third and final placement was with the Sheffield NSPCC team. And I learned a lot from that team. I learned a lot from my practice teacher. These were, experienced, professional, committed people who helped me become a social worker, basically. In more recent years, I've done lots of training with the NSPCC. I've trained NSPCC workers. I know lots of NSPCC workers, and they're dedicated, they do a great job. But when I discovered what they are doing as an organisation in accepting this money, this tainted money from a complicit organisation, JCB, so they've become complicit themselves as an organisation. So I was horrified. If I hadn't had all that personal, professional connection that I've just gone through, I would have been horrified anyway, but it just added to it for me. And so the Mental Health Network have written to the NSPCC, sort of joined in the actions of Sharon and the wider campaign in making contact with them. And we wrote an open letter that you can find on I don't know if you can share links, Mick, here on Facebook or what have you, but you can find it on the UK Palestine Mental Health Network website, under a tab called Resources, under a tab called NSPCC JCB campaign. There's an open letter that we wrote, I think, in late September. And so just to come back a bit and mention the Social Work Action Network, they've also written an open letter to the NSPCC. So these are letters going from within the profession by social workers to the NSPCC. And I think SWAN, the Social Work Action Network, first put a statement on their website, which dates back to August. So kudos to SWAN, basically, for doing this and for leading the way. And again, that's still there. You can go to the Social Work Action Network website. I think it's socialworkfuture.org or futures.org. So the NSPCC have just ignored all of this, basically. We've had the response as professionals, as social workers, as social work organisations that Annie has outlined. It's the same response that the wider campaign received. Basically a dismissive response, and amazing really to respond and to say we won't take money from organisations that, I don't know what the wording is, involved in human trafficking, child labour, slavery. So there's almost like an implicit addition, but demolishing people's homes is okay. That's that.
So look how good we are. We oppose all these evils, and that's the only evils that you can hold us accountable for. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. It does seem strange to list particular, there must be some reason for it, why there's listing particular outrageous acts, but as if to say that, I mean, just looking at that film that we showed at the beginning, and that was on the 11th of February. So that's a very recent film, very recent. You saw the JCB bulldozers there. When, as Annie said, the NSPCC should be scrutinising in advance of taking money off organisations, scrutinising those organisations. But okay, maybe they didn't scrutinise JCB. But in a sense, so what? They've now seen the JCB, what they're doing. They've had it all spelled out to them by the campaign, the letters from Annie and colleagues, letters from the Mental Health Network and the Social Work Action Network. And now you can see it. It's there. There's a JCB bulldozer. And I think on the same day that Tom I think, tweeted his film. The Channel 4 News. I bet many people watching this will have seen the news items on Channel 4 News on the 11th of February. It's on the website now. Just Google Channel 4 News. If you Google, I mean, I just Googled earlier to check Channel 4 News, a Bedouin, I put in, and it took me straight to the news item, 6 minutes long, presented by Jon Snow. JCB bulldozers all over the place. So it's just there, it's visible. I find it unbelievable that a social work organisation like the NSPCC can just continue to take this money and to say to people that are speaking to them, no, we're not listening to you, we're just continuing, when it's just visible. So you perhaps need to come in here, Mick. I'm just going to get into, I'm going to continue and get into more and more of an outraged state, because it's just such a, it just seems so clear cut. This is why it's hard to understand. Perhaps moving on from there, I'd recommend people to have a look at an article by Martin Kemp, who's a co-founder of the UK Palestine Mental Health Network. And Martin's article was first published by Middle East Monitor. It's on the Middle East Monitor website. I've got to read out the title. It's now on the ICAD website as well, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Clearly, not every child is worth fighting for. Racism, conscience, and the NSPCC. And every childhood is worth fighting for is a sort of part of the branding of the NSPCC. So as this headline says of Martin's article, clearly not every child is worth fighting for. Racism, conscience, and the NSPCC. So Martin puts it, interrogating this question: why are the NSPCC persisting in this, really? And he draws an analogy.
It really is an absolute outrage. Guy, I was immediately reminded when I heard about this, and I think there are some parallels. Then Save the Children gave Tony Blair a special award. And I seem to remember a couple of hundred staff members of Save the Children strongly objected to that and said it tarnished their image and made their work more difficult. It certainly did, because how many children had he been responsible for making homeless or killing in Iraq and elsewhere? But have they not learned from this? Has the NSPCC not learned? And when you approach them with a well-researched brief, I would expect them to actually give in pretty quickly, but that's not the case. Who wants to comment on that?
Well, can I just mention, I mean, fully agreed with what you've just said, but can I just mention, in terms of Save the Children, I mean, organisations are complex, aren't they? And Save the Children are doing great work in Palestine, and they brought out a report last year about the imprisonment, the detention of Palestinian children in Israeli military prisons. Report's called Defenseless. So it's a very up-to-date report, and they spoke to hundreds of Palestinian children who have been detained. It's on the Save the Children website. That's last year, 2020. Back in about 2009, Save the Children, more directly connected with the topic today, Save the Children carried out a research study with the Palestinian Counselling Centre and an organisation called the Welfare Association based in Jerusalem, about the impact, about home demolitions and the impact in particular on children, which is also available. It might be a bit harder to find because it's a little bit older, but it's 2009, it's available online. And they've got the voices of Palestinian children contained in that report. In fact, I can read some of them out, Mick. If Duhar, age 15, from Ramallah: all our things are gone. There is no money. We were absent from school for 1 week because we lost our school uniforms, our books and our clothes. Our teachers brought me a school uniform and a bag. At first, I was going to school wearing slippers. Sort of brings it home to you. You know, homes are demolished and everything within them is demolished as well. And so all that the children need to go to school in is demolished as well. I won't read out more, but you could, I mean, perhaps I'll be able to get the link to you before we finish today, Mick, to that report from Save the Children. That was a slight detour, I think, Mick, because you mentioned Save the Children. You were saying something else or asked something else.
You're absolutely right. I mean, to make it as concrete as that and to report the words of those children, obviously Save the
Yeah.
Children have some fantastic people who do fantastic work, and then they've got somebody who thinks that Tony Blair's a role model. I'm sure that what you're trying to do is appeal to everybody of conscience inside the NSPCC, and there ought to be a lot of them.
Yeah. Just going back to Martin's article, if I may. I mean, Martin he drew a very interesting parallel, or analogy perhaps, between what's happening now and the NSPCC accepting this money, and with Edward Colston, the Bristol slave trader, who did good works and was a philanthropist. And as Martin points out in his article, if the NSPCC existed and other organisations like it existed back then, he would probably have given money to it. And that wouldn't have been, no one would, well, I don't know about no one, but people wouldn't have seen anything wrong with that. But we do now. We do now, because he did what he did. The slave trade happened, was enabled because of racism, because black people weren't seen as full human beings. So that's the analogy that's been drawn.
Don't you both think, I mean, folk who make their money from producing arms that shatter children's limbs and tear them apart, men, or the Congo or Palestine, Gaza, anywhere, they kiss their own children goodnight, and they have tender, loving hearts, I'm sure, for some children, but it somehow gets compartmentalized from the horror that they are facilitating elsewhere. And presumably these NSPCC leaders who want to continue taking the lucre from JCB, they're the same. They don't think about those bulldozers and the young men and women and children in the rubble of their homes, and they're supposed to be preventing cruelty to children. Annie, come on in, give Guy a rest.
I think you're absolutely right on that, Mick, but it's part of a wider ignoring of the Palestinian question, a refusal to let the Palestinian voice be heard. And well, we've got a good example of that within the campaign, because Shireen coordinated an open letter which got about 70 odd signatures, some very distinguished people, and she sent it to The Guardian. Now, back in November, when the first lot of massive demolitions in the Jordan Valley happened, The Guardian and other, mainstream newspapers did a big splash, and they covered the Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights case against JCB. So they really put JCB in the spotlight. They published some letters on the letter pages about it as well back in November. Come February, the same community is demolished again with JCB equipment. And so this was a good time to release, or to send to The Guardian, this open letter, distinguished people bringing up the same issues again about JCB and about the NSPCC. But The Guardian hasn't published it. And I don't think The Guardian has covered this lot of demolition. Guy pointed out that Jon Snow on Channel 4 covered it, which was good. It was good to see that. But so the way the NSPCC top brass is of a piece with the attitudes of the elite in this country, the elite media, the governments, etc., who don't want to prioritise the Palestinian voice. And actually, it's down to us to try to make that, to change that. And I mean, I hope Guy will come on to tell us about the day of action that's proposed, which could have a big effect, because it's ICAD UK, it's SWAN, it's UK Palestine Mental Health Network, and it's PSC England and Wales, who've jumped on board with it as well. But yeah, it's shocking, the situation, but it is up to us to try to make it different, I think.
Everybody, please pay attention, because Guy is going to take us into not just how we can really feel sad about the horror and identify with the victims, but what we can do about it. But Guy, just in passing, don't you think you're tackling sort of corporate veil? Shell doesn't want to take responsibility in a British court for devastating parts of Nigeria with oil slicks and so on. So if they were to allow that they were responsible for what the end users do with their product, where would it all end? I mean, can you comment on that? I'm not defending JCB, you understand, but I just think it's part of a much bigger picture. Please, Guy, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not. You'd have to go through that again, make me to comment on that. To be honest, I just didn't quite catch.
I'm just thinking there's a constant. It's a constant of British politics and economics that big corporations say they are not responsible for what their partners do in Nigeria or Colombia or anywhere else. So if Coca-Cola says, look, if they murder trade unionists in the Coca-Cola plant in Bogota, nothing to do with us, that's somewhere else. And it seems to me this corporate veil, this protection of the main actors in a corporation, or the NSPCC maybe have internalized that value, is just part of something bigger, is it not, Guy?
Yeah, well, that's just got me thinking about the distant things that organisations can do. And as part of their responses to us, the NSPCC have said, look, you need to contact JCB because this is about their export activities. And maybe the JCB are sort of distancing themselves because they say, well, it's the people, we just sell it, So they sell it to an organisation in Israel called Camasco. And I'm just looking at the Camasco website. I just got there by Googling JCB Camasco. And they're the sole JCB dealer in Israel. And they proudly say, since 1966. And at the bottom of the homepage, the page about this connection, it says preserving family values. Both JCB and Camasco are family-owned businesses, which is bitterly ironic, really. But just reading that and looking at that page, you just see the connection between JCB and Camasco. So there's no distance there at all, really. But anyway, they're making profits from whoever they sell it to, and they know how it's been used in Israel. They've been the dealer since 1966. There's been reports on this way back. The War on Want report about the use of JCB bulldozers was in 2012. That's 9 years ago. So there's no excuse that anyone has for the JCB to continue to sell, and there's no excuse for the NSPCC to continue to take money off them. So moving on to the day of action. This is the 4th of March, and every year the NSPCC hold a conference called How Safe Are Our Children? It's interesting, how safe are our children? So taking an international outlook, the world's children are our children. How safe? So we're calling our day of action, How Safe Are Palestinian Children? So it's a 2-day online conference on the 4th and 5th of March. So we're holding this day of action on the 4th of March to coincide with the first day of the conference. And it'll be a social media, mainly Twitter-based, but also writing to the NSPCC-based action. So we're asking people to tweet on the day, we're using the hashtags. It's all outlined on the Mental Health Network website. Maybe if you get hold of the link to that, Mick, and put it in the chat or wherever you're putting this stuff.
Yeah.
We're asking
Somebody
people
will
to
post
tweet.
it, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's on the UK Palestine Mental Health Network site under the resources tab under NSPCC JCB campaign, and then next to that it says how safe are Palestinian children. So there's some suggested tweets there using the hashtag HowSafe2021, HowSafe2021, which is the NSPCC conference hashtag. We're suggesting alongside that how safe are Palestinian children as a hashtag. The campaign's been hashtagging NSPCC drop JCB for some time. So there's various hashtags you can use, and then to tweet as you see fit, just calling on the NSPCC to drop the JCB. And I believe that they should do this. And, we should campaign in the strong hope that they will see that this is the right thing to do. As well as tweeting, we want people to write to the NSPCC. So it's really just widening out the action and making it a mass action. So far there's been Annie in the campaign writing, there's been the Mental Health Network, the Social Work Action Network, and some concerned individuals who have written individually, but we're wanting hundreds of people to write on the 4th of March and thousands of people to tweet. We're also asking people to inform themselves on that day, and to talk to friends and colleagues, talk to their trade union branches, their professional association branches, and just spread the word. But centrally tweet and write to the NSPCC. Yeah.
Well, before Annie, would you like to come in on that? You're asking people to send letters in a foreign letter. You're asking folk to make up their own and express their own feelings and passion. What sort of tone are you asking for? Obviously, we don't want to be stupidly angry, but people should be angry, shouldn't they? And they should express articulately.
I mean, I think that language really matters, Mick. You know, my whole career was involved in language, either through literature or teaching English language in college. And it appalls me when people invoke the language of morality and then don't apply it. So to say every child matters, yes, I'm with you, every child matters. But then to say, but not Palestinian children. So I think what I would suggest is that anybody who contacts the NSPCC quotes their values back at them and simply says, all we want you to do is to live up to these values and not to have a donor that clearly doesn't value the lives of Palestinian children, because if they did, they would break their link with Camasco. JCB would break its link with Camasco straight away, and the NSPCC should break its link with JCB unless and until it stops selling its equipment, knowing what's going to happen to it. And I would just say that recently, I believe the Financial Times launched a scheme to try to get 100 companies to donate money to the NSPCC. I don't think the NSPCC is terribly strapped for cash. Obviously, charities always need more, but I think they could drop JCB and still get donations from other much more reputable companies and from individuals. We're not asking people to stop donating to the NSPCC because there's children on the receiving end of those donations. Nobody wants children to be harmed. But I think Guy's key point about telling them that their reputation is being called into question because they're using language wrongly, hypocritically, it is a very strong argument. And just saying, get back on the right path and show that when you say every child matters, every child is worth fighting for, you really mean it. In addition to what Guy said, there's an additional action that a few of us are doing, and it is only a few for a reason that I'll explain. There's about 50 professionals who are either going to speak at or facilitate at the conference. These are very dedicated people. You can see from their CVs, from their information on the programme of the NSPCC, that they're very good people, but we don't think they know about the JCB. So just a very small number of us are going to write to them respectfully and just inform them, because they stand at 2 steps removed. They're not choosing to link with JCB, just to say, great work that you're doing, good conference, but do you know that the sponsor of that conference links with a company that profits, shamelessly profits, from the destruction of Palestinian families and the ruination of Palestinian children's lives?
I mean, you can't be a social worker in one street and facilitate child abuse on another street. It doesn't go, it doesn't fit. And I mean, I suppose the most important word in politics, I have a little hate session every morning listening to Radio 4, but it's usually the word we and our. Who does that encompass when you use it? You know, our children. It has to be not something that stops at Dover or the Irish Sea. It has to be general. I mean, how can, I guess these guys can live with themselves. The people at the top know, and their throats are stuffed with gold, and the folk at the bottom just don't know, or they don't want to. Some people don't want to believe the worst of their bosses or the people in the company. There's sometimes a reluctance to face up to a horrible reality. Do you think there's any? Do you think that's part of the reason why some people don't want to take up this issue?
I think in terms of facing up to the reality, I think people have got to see the reality, and I do think it's important to hear Palestinian voices. It's partly why I read out one of those comments before from that research. If you look at the open letter on the UK Palestine Mental Health Network website to the NSPCC, there's a couple of links embedded into that letter about research. The one that I've mentioned already, and also one by Professor Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who's a Palestinian academic in Jerusalem, also a guest professor at the Queen Mary's in London. So she does great work, and she did a great piece of research, an article published in a journal called Feminism and Psychology about the impact on children on Palestinian children of home demolitions, and it's linked to in that letter. And again, some of the voices of the Palestinian children are in there. And let me just quote one more. A 14-year-old girl called Asma. When they demolished our house, I felt naked. I was going crazy. I became a refugee on the rubbles of my home. So I think when people sort of get the reality by hearing or reading the voices of Palestinian children in particular, I think people act, people react, people change their minds. And so I would, respectfully and politely just call on, if I was, asking people to write to the NSPCC on the 4th of March, just call on them to think again and to look further into this and to do the right thing, basically. And campaigning works. There's been, some good news recently for Palestinian campaigners. The East Sussex Pension Fund, they've divested funds from Elbit Systems, Israel's largest private arms manufacturer, and the Academic Board of the University College in London has been looking into the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and seen it not fit for purpose. And this is a result of, in part, of campaigning. So I think we should be hopeful and confident going into this. That the NSPCC, should, as I say, do the right thing and end their relationship with JCB.
Before Annie comes in, I'm going to write to them and mention when I went to, before I was banned from going into Palestine by the Israelis, I remember going to Silwan in Jerusalem and going to the action tent there, the resistance tent, where people were organizing against the incessant attempts to drive them out. And what moved me, I've forgotten some of the detail I was told then, it was all moving. But what I haven't forgotten is that we were told that the children at that time were going to every morning and taking their toys with them to school and their precious things, because they were afraid when they came home, their homes would no longer be there. The kids were taking their stuff to school. I mean, it really, you get it, you don't forget that. It's really poignant. So the cruelty that JCB is facilitating, bitter cruelty. In fact, maybe next week we'll try and get somebody on from Middle East Children's Alliance or Professor Shalhoub-Kevorkian to discuss this in more detail. We had Mona El Farah on from the Middle East Children's Alliance recently, but not specifically focusing on that horror. Annie, it's horrible. I mean, the NSPCC taking money from JCB. Would they take money from people who are selling bullets to shoot children? I mean, where do you draw a line? Is there a red line? Yeah. I'd like to know what NSPCC's red line is. Annie, please.
Well, they've told us what their red line is, and their moral benchmark's really low. I read out their ethical guidelines. Nobody would take money from drug dealers, slavery, human trafficking, etc. And if you wait on the government, you'll be waiting forever. So they've got a very, very low benchmark, but their language is very high flown and highfalutin. And I think Guy's point about seeing it and learning about it and knowing what's happening. I think there's an ICAD webinar on Wednesday, which is about East Jerusalem, another place where JCB equipment is in use almost every day, demolishing homes, or actually, shockingly, Palestinians having to hire the equipment themselves and demolish their own homes because it's cheaper to do it that way, and because it doesn't do as much, they do it more carefully, and they don't do the same collateral damage. So I think that's right. And I'd also pick up what Guy said. There have been some very encouraging signs at the minute, and I think we've got to be optimistic. We don't know how they're feeling on the other side. We just see that we're battling away, and they're rebutting us. But what we don't know is what's going on behind the scenes. And it's like when anything happens, when the Berlin Wall fell, it happened and it came seemingly out of the blue. Lawyers for Palestinian Human Rights have still got their case going. More organisations are joining the campaign. And actually, I think it was a Palestinian that said this, and I love this quotation. It's Raymond Williams, one of my favourite, and I've got to get it in. He said, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing." And I think when you've got people like Guy and Simon in Swan and Martin Kemp at your back and Mick Yu and ICAD and PSC England and UK, you just think, well, hope is possible, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I'd like to invite you both to make some closing remarks and to take us up to the top of the hour. It's a great pleasure having you say that, and I think this really is a campaign where we can win if we generate enough energy. Yeah, you want to respond to any points that have been made and final remarks?
Thanks, Mick. Well, Mick, to say thanks very much to you and to Scottish PSC for this, and I just found that last comment by Annie quoting Raymond Williams fantastic. I think when the Social Work Action Network, when they formed, part of how they formed was Ian Ferguson, Michael Lavalette, and others. I shouldn't have mentioned names because I've forgotten some of the other people involved. Put out a manifesto. And they talked about resources for a journey of hope, I think, which is from Raymond Williams. And it's important we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't have hope. So I think for the 4th of March and the campaign as it goes on from there, there is hope, and that's why we're doing it. So, change is possible, change could happen. And so we're gathering up our resources for a journey of hope, basically.
Yeah.
Annie?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with that. I mean, our best source of hope is the Palestinians. How do they keep their hope? How do they keep their hope going? But they do. And as long as they do, then that's what we have to do as well. And work is never wasted. Work is never lost. You put markers down. You might think it's not gone very far, but you never, ever know when change is going to happen.
I couldn't agree more. I think having you on today is going to give us a push to do something from now until March the 4th. Now, you want people writing letters from now on, don't you? Not to wait till March the 4th. On March the 4th, you want us to get tweeting and active on social media. And we'll share those links with everybody who's signed up today. You'll get a brief email explaining this. Annie, I was thinking, I hope you don't mind me telling a story I bore people with all the time, but when you said you never know how the other side are responding, you don't know the discussions inside the NSPCC. I mean, when we were campaigning against the Israelis coming to the Edinburgh Festival, we didn't know that Hillary Clinton had set up a special group in the State Department to counteract the efforts of 20 people in Edinburgh. We only got that because she was forced by a judge to reveal her the fact she'd used a private email server for festival. So a complete quirk of American politics. We learned that they were running scared. They were talking about the infectiousness of this. Where will it all end? This is terrible. And millionaires were talking among themselves about people who had, well, I don't know, they didn't have two pennies to rub together, but they were active in support of Palestine. So I agree. You never know you're going to win until the wall crumbles at the last minute. And they always tell you, you can't influence us. Forget it. You're wasting your time. So let's all make a real push. But we don't forget for a minute that this is a government that sells sniper rifle parts to the Israeli army while the snipers mow down Palestinians. That's the impulse for us to do our duty. This is something we can win. I think we'll have another discussion next Sunday that relates to this and informs what's going on. You could talk for a very long time about what these are doing to children, not just torture inside the prisons, not just shooting them, actually. The UNHCR published a report, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, saying that Israel is killing journalists and is killing children, knowing that they are children and knowing that they are journalists. And that report got publicity for a day or two. Mm-hmm. So there's a depth of depravity there that we have to try and convey to people here and to NSPCC supporters and funders to say, look, you can't be a part of that, even if you perfume your hands. Friends, it's a real pleasure to have Guy and Annie. Your work's an inspiration, the two of you. And thanks very much for banging away at this. And we'll try to bring it to the widest audience we can before and after the 4th of March, if we don't get a resounding victory shortly afterwards. Guy Shennan, O'Gara, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. It's a real pleasure.
That's been great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
It's just a couple of announcements. On Tuesday, the inimitable Salman Abu Sitta is doing a webinar, not for us. He's done some already, but he's for SOAS. And it's a fantastic webinar, 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. I know there's webinars wall to wall, but I think Salman Abu Sitta's one on Tuesday is deserving. And I think it'll be fantastically valuable if you join in. The news from East Sussex is really wonderful, because a couple of years ago we got a similar victory with Falkirk Pension Fund, and the head of the council in Stirling wrote to Helen Scolina on behalf of Time to Divest to say, we hope the divestment from Israeli bank Hapoalim will reassure you integrity of the council. No doubt they saw it as a political move, but since then they're rowing back from that a little bit, but the letter's there. So yeah, Time to Divest is another way that you can join in exerting pressure for change concerning the apartheid state. Friends, once again, thanks very much. It's 3 minutes to 5. It's a beautiful day here with its snow and slush and darkness for a very long time, but the sun is shining today. But there are many Palestinians living in rubble in Gaza because Israel won't allow building materials in. Thanks very much, Guy. Thanks very much, Annie.
Thank you.
Goodbye from me, Mick.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mick. Thanks, Guy.
Cheers, Mick. Thanks, Annie.
As-salama.